Tap series every Sunday, and it's a chance for us to drink and just talk about conservative politics and philosophy and enjoy that. Tonight we're going to take a little more laid back approach, and I'm going to have John on the show, and we're just going to spend some time talking about this holiday and the people who have really made it awesome for us. So I want to go ahead and welcome him on now. So, hey, John, how you doing?
Good to be here, man. Always good to be here.
Good.
Just talking up Burke philosophy, but just doing this on a special day.
Yeah.
I like being here.
So I guess my first question for you is, well, first, normally we talk about what we're drinking, but I think tonight we both agreed that we'd stick with water, just out of the purity of the memories of people that we have and how much this means to us. But let me ask you this: what does Memorial Day mean to you specifically?
Well, yeah. Let me touch on the water aspect first. Of it's not because I've already drank a lot of alcohol or anything like that. I promise. It's more or less really just it comes from that biblical narrative. Like I'm thinking about First Peter, 4:7, where he says, "Be sober minded, so that you can pray." And I think about Memorial Day as being a time where you can give that kind of thanks, not just to the people that are around you that are serving, but also this collective prayer to God to say thank you for the grace of being with these men and these women who have served, who preserve the liberties that we enjoy, down to the next generation and the next generation. So I think the water for a Burke on tap, I think that is appropriate
Sure.
for today.
Well, I made this graphic earlier today just to kind of help set the holiday straight in terms of what it means. It's just some quick bullet points about Memorial Day. It began in the 19th century in 1868, and originally it was called Decoration Day, and it began out of this practice of decorating the graves of Civil War casualties. So you had it on both sides. You had on the Confederate side and on the Union side. Different folks would get together and they would decorate the graves. And of course, there were so many in the Civil War, such an awful time. But eventually, this practice really became a tradition that expanded to all American wars after World War I, and now we kind of see it right associated with recent wars. Particularly, people think about those that have been lost recently, but you can go back and think of really anybody who has given it all, who has sacrificed a lot in support of our freedom, like you said. So now it's this specific holiday where we think about those who really have sacrificed a lot. So what
Mm.
does that bring to mind for you, John?
I was thinking that everyone has an opportunity to give thanks. I mean, even if you have not served, you probably know someone who has served, or it's a good opportunity to go to your family and to wonder if anyone has served in your family, and to ask them stories. I mean, I know, Wes, that there was a time, back when we were in high school and you were in college, and you had gone to mom's Uncle Warren, and asked him some questions that no one had really ever had the guts to ask him. We'd always seen him during like Thanksgiving or during the holidays, but as he was aging, it was important for him to share some stories that only you brought out
Yeah.
in him, and that was because of some decisions that you made to go into the Air Force. But I just remember the whole family being transfixed by the fact that he was sharing stories to you that he hadn't shared for years,
Yeah.
if even to anyone.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, let's talk about him. So, I actually have some pictures of from when he served in World War II, and I'm showing that now. So, Warren Coolidge Garrett, and you can see there it's got his services in the Navy and his hometown in Tennessee, and then he was honored by our mom as well as some of his other relatives. And I've actually got a couple things to read here about him. So, obviously he was active in the Pacific Theater, and he was able to, like you said, come out with some of his experiences and share those before he died. And so I thought it was going to be interesting here to talk about some of them. So I'll read some of the things that he shared. He said that his activity during World War II was that he served as a seaman second class on the Navy's smallest ship. The crew consisted of 60 seamen. He served a total of 2 years and received a Purple Heart. He told stories of serving on the Pacific Front. His boat was anchored with other U.S. ships off Guadalcanal. They were strictly forbidden to break radio silence at night and were told not to fire weapons for fear this would alert the Japanese to their location. The night watch was forced to be done by sight only, and in the middle of the night, the Japanese would try to climb the anchor chains and board the U.S. boats. The night watch guards stood near the chains and hit the Japanese with the butt of their guns as they tried to board the ships. It was a battle fought in silence. When the fog would clear in the morning, there would be hundreds of Japanese bodies floating in the water. One morning, as the dawn broke, he noticed that the small boat next to him did not have the appropriate seaman stationed as ordered. He reported this to the captain, and it was later discovered that the boat had been attacked in the night and all the crew silently killed by the enemy as they slept in their bunks. He served as a gunner with a gun that took four crewmen to operate, one to fire the weapon, one as the spotter, one to load it, and one to assist the loader. In one kamikaze attack, he was firing the gun and saw one of his assistants decapitated. The murdered seaman was quickly replaced. There was very little time to process this type of trauma. He said that the Navy had a tradition. The first time any seaman crossed the equator, the more experienced seamen would have a ceremony in which the first timer's head was shaved. He said he was just a boy during the war. When things were calm, they would get permission to go swimming. There was always one seaman on watch with a machine gun in case circumstances changed quickly. One time, he and a friend swam too far out and they came into contact with a shark. They had to yell for help and the gunman promptly took the shark out. He was wounded by shrapnel. The doctors wanted to amputate his legs. He told them he was a farmer and could not return without his legs. The doctors agreed to ship him back to the U.S., where he made a full recovery. He did not want to fly back to the U.S. Instead, he spent 6 weeks on a boat returning to San Francisco from the Pacific front. He was stuck in a bunk with his legs elevated. Every morning, the captain would come on the intercom and inform the crew that a Japanese submarine was following them. He knew that if the submarine decided to attack, he would not make it out alive. He could not walk. The captain reported that the only reason the submarine did not attack was because their ship was not loaded. The Japanese could
Mm.
discern this due to how deep the boat was in the water. It was running light. The Japanese were hoping the transport would take them to appropriate targets. It followed the ship as far as it could just off the coast of San Francisco. He was secretly hoarding parts of a gun. He had parts scattered throughout his bunk, locker, and other places. He wanted to make one for himself as a keepsake of the war. When he was wounded, his duffel bag was sent back to the U.S. for him. To his disappointment, his bag did not include the parts of his would-be gun.
Mm.
Oh, I thought that was so interesting. It's like all these different like miscellaneous comments and experiences that he had. So what do you make of all that, John?
I want to like read between the
Yeah,
lines on all that had happened because you think that there's so many untold stories in between those lines, and the counselor in me just wants to be able to gather those stories from him and see how he has processed it. When you talk about how he was just practically a boy and experiencing things like the trauma, I mean that speaks to me, and really wishing and hoping that more people like him can share those stories, as traumatic as they are, to face the reality of what happened and to see how they can move forward. I know that people come back with post traumatic stress, and you've had experiences yourself going abroad and coming back and seeing people affected. And I yearn for those stories to be shared in a very healthful way, and I think Memorial Day can lead to that.
yeah,
I was thinking a little bit about what Burke talks about with honor and how he views honor as being a heritable trait. Actually, it's something that is actually passed down. Whereas conscience focuses on your relationship with God, it's honor that centralizes your relationship with man. And I think that you did that well with Warren. I really wish that we could have done that with our own grandfather as well, George Seiler.
yeah. Well, yeah, I mean it's amazing because reading through that story, he's got. I mean, there are these clear dangers to himself and to the United States. You got this Japanese submarine that's essentially chasing their boat, right? You've got the fear of these guys coming up out of the water in the middle of the night and they have to defend themselves. You've got sharks in the water, right? But at the same time, you can also see the humor in what he was doing. You can see like he's trying to put together his own little like gun, right? Like he's trying to make keepsakes from the war, and they're trying to like just live their life and enjoy it. And like you said, you see the sense of honor there is that yeah, he had this injury and received a Purple Heart, but he didn't want to fly back to the U.S. He wanted to stay with his guys. He wanted to stay with the team. So I think that's amazing. But you also brought
So,
up our grandfather, and I've got some pictures of him that I wanted to share here. So what you're seeing here is in the middle is the Purple Heart that he received, also in the Pacific Theater. You see a photo of him there on the right,
mhm.
being in the army, and then there's his medical discharge that he received as well. And so,
Yeah.
what yeah, when we talk about him, what first comes to mind?
Wes, so much happened with him during the war. You know, he was an engineer in the army, and he obviously drove trucks close enough to the battle lines to get injured, but he was left on the battlefield for days, Wes, with
For
no
Dave,
one, yeah, and no one coming to pick him up for a while. So you know that did a number on his mental health. You know, you've seen that movie, A Beautiful Mind.
yeah,
Well, it's you know how John Nash goes through this electroshock therapy. Like they put, you know, our grandfather through that 4 or 5 times
yeah,
at least to help out his mental state and all that had been affected. And so you know, like he had been through not only the ringer when it came to wartime, but also in his recovery. He was in North Carolina for a year just trying to recuperate. So, you know, that Purple Heart that he obtained, it was very much earned on the battlefield, and I think very much earned on the table the medical facility.
yeah,
But it was a long road to recovery, and actually, I don't think he ever recovered. Wes, you know, it affected him. You know, it affected his wife,
hmm
and I mean, there was a point where, you know, I'm not even sure we really know fully how he saw his own Purple Heart. There
hmm
was one point where he was thinking about giving it away.
yeah,
I wonder if there was shame involved, if he just felt like he didn't earn it, or if he just was in a different state altogether and didn't, you know, fully understand its value. But it was because of our grandmother
yeah,
that we still have it today,
right,
and we hold it in honor. So it's those kind of things that you wonder, like, what are the stories that he couldn't say? What are the stories that he couldn't tell? Because there weren't any sort of institutions that were well equipped or had done enough studies to recognize that that's what was needed. So I sympathize with that sort of thing, but at the same time, I I do feel proud of his legacy, and I think our dad does as well. It's just that war takes on so many casualties, not just on the battlefield, but in the home as well. Because you know how much our grandmother had to go through in helping him out and making sure that she looked after the family when he couldn't do that.
yeah. I think about how different the world is today, right? Like, I mean, there's so many things that are different, in terms of how is war fought. You could talk about, PTSD and the fact that it really wasn't even recognized back then, and now it is. And you have all these different doctors that are trying to figure out how to treat it, and increasingly there are programs and stuff. It's still a long way to go, but certainly some progress has been made. And I think it's because of his generation and the ones before it that it experienced all of this, and now we're starting to recognize and learn, from previous experience how to do this a little easier, or a little bit better, or to take a little bit better care of our people. But again, it's just a long way to go. I did some research on the island where he experienced that, where he had the shrapnel in his body, and he was there for 3 days, and fighting to stay alive. And
Hmm.
now it's this forested coastal like experience that people go to for big. It's beautiful, right? Like technically it's in Indonesia now, and I was looking at pictures of it, and it's like, man, now this is a place that like we could go, and have a great time. And how wild is that? The other thing is, if you ever had any like qualms about the Japanese ability to fight, or if were curious as to how tough they were, the island that George Sr. actually fought at, and where he experienced that, was the location for the last holdout of World War II. So the last Japanese holdout,
Man,
this is true. Uh, Private Nakamura was discovered by the Indonesian Air Force on Morotai, the island, and finally surrendered to a search patrol on December 18th, 1974. So almost 30 years later from when from when our granddad experienced that. Isn't that wild? Like talking about all these stories and all this stuff that comes out of these experiences. I thought that was shocking to me.
That is wild.
Yeah, about holding out for that long. But but yeah, like it's to me it's this time where you can think about these people who went before us and the steps that they took has made our life, different and in many ways better. So I have a quote for you, and I put it out on our Facebook page, and we can kind of end with this. And it's from uh, he says, "We are like dwarfs on the shoulders of giants, so that we can see more than they, and things at a greater distance, not by virtue of any sharpness of sight on our part, or any physical distinction, but because we are carried high and raised up by their giant size."
Mm.
Bernard Barthes. So I had some Burke quotes that were very similar to this, but this is really one of my favorites, and it hits me every Memorial Day. Is thinking about the shoulders of giants that we stand on, and that's when I think of these men and the women who fought and served in these different wars, and face these crazy conditions, and didn't have the same level of care, or that we have. That's what I think about. I think about them as giants, and the things that we accomplish today are due in no small part to what they've done and their sacrifice.
Yeah, and my encouragement from Burke would be that during those times when you are around family that have served, or there's an opportunity for these family stories to be shared, we need to take people up on these offers to share their stories when and where they can. I know that there's trauma involved in a lot of these stories, but like as you said, like there's humor, there's ways to bring it out. I know that when we were being introduced to what war was like, Dad ended up showing us Saving Private Ryan when we were growing up, but he really made that a big deal of just saying like what people sacrificed
Yeah,
to fight in these wars and to preserve our freedoms and to save the world really. And I think that there are opportunities for to reflect a Burkean conservatism on Memorial Day, where you gather together as a family, right? This domestic unit, and that honor begins there at the home. And even if you don't have anyone that served, I mean, you can watch certain things and prep your kids
yeah,
to be able to handle certain things. I mean, would you rather have your kid watching some type of rated R, war film, just for the fun of it with popcorn, or would you rather have them actually learn the story, from you, and in your home, in the honor of your home? And that's what I remember, Dad doing for us, which I really appreciated. And then I recall that, same sense leading me when I ended up watching something like Band of Brothers, and you start seeing like between the lines these stories that happen, whether the good, the bad, the ugly, the humorous, the sad, it all flows together in a narrative. So I'm hoping that people can like look up from their smartphones, look up from their computers during times like this, and actually say like, start engaging in conversation
yeah.
with people, with their family members, and to share these stories that otherwise would be lost.
Yeah, my last thought on it too is, that, no one is expecting or thinking that these guys were perfect, right? And I think that tends to be where the critique comes from the left is, they're very quick to say, well, that was a time where, there wasn't as much racial equality, or, there was colonialism if you go back far enough, like there was all these horrible things, and that's absolutely true. There were a lot of things that weren't great, but to me, that doesn't diminish the good things that these guys accomplished, right? The sacrifices that were made. And so, when you look back, I mean, at your own life, the things that I want to focus on is the things that I did right, and the things that I did wrong is what I want to apologize for and move on from and learn from. And I think when we look back at, their past, we can do the exact same thing. Is we can say, look at these amazing sacrifices that were done on behalf of our country, especially for those people who gave everything. And we can honor that, we can cherish that, we can see that as a noble sacrifice. And then, to the extent that these people weren't perfect, maybe that's a gift as well. That's part of that inheritance that Burke talks about. That's something that we can learn from, and then we can grow from, because we're in that same flow, that same part of history as well. Future generations may do the same with us, right?
And Wes, from a A faith standpoint as well, there's a book that I really enjoy that I've read before. It's called Speaker for the Dead. It's a work of fiction by Orson Scott Card, but there is an occupation that is called the Speaker for the Dead, and it is someone who believes that everyone, no matter who they were, deserves something, an honest, truthful look at their life, and that's to go through the good, go through the bad, go through the not so pretty, because life is very, very complicated. So it's not that you can look back and say, oh, this person was a hero, or this person was a racist, or this person was a misogynist. Like, when we don't need to like honor them at all anymore. Like, it's life is so much more complicated than that, and I think Burke recognizes that sort of thing in the complication of a human life. And you know that we could go on about our grandfather and about the good that he's done, and also about the memories that our father has of him that aren't so good. You know, he wasn't a perfect guy. In fact, you know, there was a lot of flaws in him, but that doesn't mean that you know, that negates the honor that should be due to him for his service. There's a lot that flows in there, and if anything that our dad learned, you know, he learned about how to trace the grace of God that flows through a life. You know, down from how it affects you know, someone who's been in war, to how it affects their spouse, to how it affects the children, to how it affects the grandchildren. You can see God's grace running through our family,
Yeah.
and I think that's something that we take from our grandfather's legacy as well. That even in amidst the imperfect, God works the perfect through him. So I think that's true about the complication of a life.
Yeah, yeah. I put up that slide of Memorial Day because I think you said it. That's exactly what it's about. So, thanks for taking time. I really enjoyed this. You know, it's important, I think, to go through these holidays with a sense of purpose and understanding why. And you definitely did that for me. So, looking forward to next week. I think we got a whole bunch of awesome guests that are going to go on. We're going to dive deep into some conservative philosophy. Definitely get back into some Burke stuff, and then hopefully have some more debates as well. So, thanks
I'll
again.
be ready to drink this time.
All right. Have a good one.
Take care, man.